So for breakfast dishes, we do a lot of different things. We do omelets, we do just eggs, we do frittatas, we do all kinds of things. Today we're going to make a Spanish omelet or a Spanish tortilla, which is really just a couple of ingredients. It's eggs, it's potatoes, I use onions and olive oil. That's it. That's all that goes in it. There's a little salt and pepper too, just to season it. But otherwise, that's the whole dish. So we're going to make that today, and I'll show you how that comes together. It's a really delightful dish. It's kind of a nice breakfasty dish. It's pretty easy to do. So let's get started. First things first, we're going to slice up some onions. We want sort of thin slices here because we want them to work well in the dish that kind of distributes through there. Now, in a traditional Spanish tortilla, you don't put onions, but I like the onions in there. I think it adds something to it. After that, we're going to cut up some potatoes. Now, normally you'd use russets or maybe Yukon Golds. I like to use potatoes with color. Now, I'm slicing them a little bit big. They're very thin, but they're a little big. I probably could slice them up a little bit more to distribute them better throughout the dish, but I like them about this size because it gives a little texture, and I think that's important to the dish. So I'm just slicing up a bunch of potatoes, and I'm going to put them into the pan in a minute to cook them up. But that's it. Just go ahead and slice them up into the slices that you like. This is a lot of potatoes for this dish, but you know, I like the potatoes. I think it adds something to it, so I'll go ahead and put that many in here. Next, we're going to move on to actually cooking it. Now, I'm using a large skillet for this. A cast iron skillet probably would have been just as well for this, and in fact, a cast iron skillet probably would be better because you get a little bit more puffiness from the eggs. This is going to give me a little bit more room to work with, but I'm not going to get the same sort of depth to my eggs that I'd get if I used a smaller pan rather than this larger one. So go ahead and get the oil nice and hot, and I'll get my onions in there and start them cooking. One of the first things you want to do is cook the onions for a little bit just to make sure that they're nice and soft. You want to kind of get the texture in there and make sure that they kind of work well in the dish. You don't want them to be kind of raw. You want them to have a nice flavor. So I go ahead and I put my onions in. I start it cooking. I make sure they're all in there and then just start moving them around in the pan with a little bit of olive oil just to get everything started. So we just keep moving them a little bit. Every once in a while, we give them a little stir around. You want them to get a little bit of color on them, so it's important to just cook them a little bit. Now, once they've started to turn just a little bit and get a little bit of color, I'm about ready to put my potatoes in. Now, the potatoes are going to cook a little bit longer. If you wanted to, you could take the potatoes and maybe bake them a little bit or put them in a little boiling water to kind of soften them a little bit, but you don't want to overcook them. So it's important to kind of use them. I'm using these thin slices. Had I cut them up a little more, they would even cook a little better. But the idea is to get some nice potato flavor in here and make sure it's distributed through the dish. And you want to make sure they're cooked all the way through. So I'm going to go ahead and get all my potatoes in here. Like I said, I have a lot of potatoes, but it's a big dish, so it's a big pan, so I should be fine. I'll go ahead and just put those in. You can see the different colored potatoes I'm using for this. I like the color contrast. That's why I decided to use these kind of potatoes. In the meantime, while those are cooking, I'm going to go ahead and get my eggs ready. Now, in this case, I'm going to use about 10 eggs. You could make it less or more, kind of adjust your recipe accordingly, how much potato you like to have in there, how much onion you like, and the number of eggs. Now, like I said, if I'd used a cast iron skillet, I probably would have gotten a little more puffiness out of the dish rather than what I'm doing, and I might have used a few fewer eggs and a little bit less potato. But because I wanted this many eggs and I wanted this much texture, I did it this way. Another dish that's kind of flexible like this where you can use different things to make it work. So all I'm going to do is just put the eggs in the pan like into a pot like this and then just start stirring them up. Then I can mix them until they're nice and frothy and all mixed together and you don't see the yolks anymore separated from the whites of the eggs. So we'll go ahead and just start mixing them. I like to break them up a little bit as I'm mixing them here, and we'll get them all mixed up and you'll get a nice little dish that's got some nice egginess to it. So that way I can just pour it right in the pan and continue to cook with it. So once it's about like this is what you want because you can see how it's kind of all mixed together. It's one nice element here where you've got all these eggs. Now I'll go ahead and I'll pour it into my dish. As soon as this is ready and I think it's cooked, and I believe that it is, it looks like they're all done, I'll go ahead and put my eggs in the dish and continue from there. So here are my eggs. I'll go ahead and do them right in the pan. Now, traditionally what you would do is you would take the potatoes out of the pan, then kind of scrape the pan down a little bit, and then put the eggs in with the potatoes at the same time. So everything kind of cools down a little bit. It makes a slightly different texture. I like to just continue to cook it this way. This works for me, and it works pretty well. So what you're going to do is go around the edges a little bit. You want to kind of pull it away from the edges just a little so that it cooks on the bottom. You're trying to get a little crust on the bottom. Cast iron skillet works great for this. This nonstick pan works well, but not as well as a cast iron skillet is in terms of getting an actual crust on it. And all I'm trying to do is let some of the eggs drip down inside and keep it away from the edges of the pan because it's going to make it easier to flip. Yeah, you have to flip this dish. So it's a little bit of a challenge. Again, cast iron skillet's a little harder to make the flip because you have to scoop it out and flip it, but I think it works pretty well this way too. So go ahead and just keep cooking it for a few minutes until it's cooked on the bottom. And once you've got it to the point where it feels like it's cooked all the way through on the bottom, you can flip it. Now, how I'm going to flip it, I'm actually going to use a sheet pan. And the sheet pan is going to help me to get it out of the pan and then flip it back on. So I'm just going to use the sheet pan and I'm going to lift it up and flip it over. That's it. I'm just trying to put it on there so I can get my hands around it. And then once I've got it ready, I can go ahead and flip it over onto the sheet pan. There you go. And I'll put my pot back on the stove. And I'll just kind of push it back off into the pan that way, just like that. And any extra that's not cooked yet, I'll go ahead and just scrape off and put back down in there, and I'll kind of reshape it once it's in there a little bit. Now I'm making a little bit of a mess, I know that. I'll go wash the sheet pan and I'll come back and work with this, and I'll clean up the counter a little bit here in the stove, just to make sure I don't have a huge mess. But that's it, I've got my dish ready now. I can go ahead and let it keep cooking on the other side. I'm gonna clean up just a little bit here to make it a little nicer. I don't like leaving a huge mess on my stove like that. But I'll go ahead and just finish cooking it. It's cooking on the other side now, so now it's going to cook the other side until it's completely cooked through. Now, you just want to leave it for a couple of minutes. The objective is to get it to the point where it rises just a little bit and cooks through. Your potatoes are already cooked, so they're warm, so they're going to help heat up the eggs along the way anyway. And when you're done, you take it off and serve it on a plate, and it looks something like this. This is a great dish, and it's very fancy, and it looks nice. Depending on how you cut your potatoes, it can look really spectacular.